Hello, and welcome to The Art of Being Selfish. I'm Dr. Sims, a licensed psychologist, and on this channel, we discuss ways that you can take care of yourself or be selfish so that you feel nourished and filled enough to take care of others. Now, although we will be talking about topics related to mental health on this channel, this is not a substitute for therapy. In today's session, we are going to be continuing our forgiveness series. Today, we're going to focus on being selfish emotionally and talking about what do we do with the emotions after we've forgiven and as we're going through the healing process. A lot of times when it comes to emotions, we either try to avoid them because we are afraid that we will completely lose control or that we won't know how to manage them, or we just let them run rampant and we don't even try to control them at all. However, neither of these are very optimal ways of addressing our emotions when we're in the process of trying to forgive. There are often very common emotions that come up when we lack forgiveness, and so today I want to talk about anger, bitterness, and resentment. So anger. Anger is often described as this intense feeling of annoyance or hostility. It's one of the emotions that we think are bad, and so we try to avoid it. But a lot of times, anger is probably one of the most commonly expressed emotions, but it's typically not expressed in a very healthy or productive way. And expressing anger actually is very healthy when it is done in a healthy or productive way. On the other side of that, anger can be very destructive if it's unchecked, if it's unprocessed, and if we're just allowing it to control our lives. A lot of times when we don't forgive people, we have a lot of pent-up anger towards them, and it can often turn into bitterness and resentment. And so not processing that anger and not allowing yourself to express that anger in a productive way can really lead to a lot of very unfortunate outcomes on the other side of that. And don't get me wrong, anger is usually very justified. Like the feeling of anger, the reasons that you're angry, the reason that you can't forgive someone or you're having a difficult time forgiving someone is typically very justified. I think I talked about this last week, that's the reason that we have to call on a higher power, because you can logically walk through the reasons why you feel angry. However, just because it's justified doesn't mean that it's necessarily something that you should give into. A lot of times when we feel angry, we want revenge. We want to make the person hurt in the same way that we do because we think that it'll make us feel better or that there will be some kind of satisfaction in response to that. And a lot of times it probably will be satisfying for the moment or will make you feel better in the moment, but in the long run, it really doesn't typically lead to healing or helping you to find forgiveness and find happiness and peace in the situation that you're upset about to begin with. Now, bitterness is anger's ugly cousin. And you can recognize people who are bitter because they really generally don't have anything good to say ever. Like you'll say good morning to them and they're like, what's so good about it? Or you'll show them a cute dog video or animal video or something like that and they just find everything that's wrong with that. Those are the people who are bitter. They are just salty. And the interesting thing about anger and bitterness is that a lot of times, especially when it's gone on for so long, the anger and that bitterness isn't even directed at the person that you need to forgive. It's often directed at our other loved ones or the other people in our lives because we're displacing that anger and that bitterness because we're not addressing it and we're not even sometimes able to show that anger or express that anger or bitterness to the person that we need to forgive. But if you start to learn how to process your anger and your bitterness, it won't matter if you can express it to that person. You won't be expressing it to the people who don't deserve it, but you'll be able to work through those feelings on your own so that they don't come out in ways that don't feel good for you or anybody else that's involved. Now, resentment. Resentment is kind of a mixture of anger and bitterness. Resentment is usually directed towards the person that you're having a hard time forgiving. Like a lot of times it happens in relationships, like intimate relationships or familiar relationships. You generally don't resent the person that cut you off in traffic. You usually resent someone that you still have a very close relationship with or you've had a close relationship with in the past. It can also be directed towards anything or anyone that reminds you of the person that you're trying to forgive or the person that you're holding that resentment towards. So the emotions that we've just been talking about are typically emotions that are directed towards other people. One of the emotions that we often experience when we haven't forgiven ourselves is guilt. We have this, I feel so bad, like that persistent, pervasive feeling of guilt and feeling heavy and feeling weighed down, like you just done something wrong and so awful. That feeling of guilt, that is when you know that you haven't forgiven yourself. And so when we're talking about forgiveness, remember, we're not just talking about forgiving other people. We also have to make sure that we're forgiving ourselves. We also tend to experience a lot of anger towards ourselves if we haven't forgiven ourselves. And so make sure that when you're thinking about, you're doing an inventory of who you need to forgive, that you're also thinking about forgiving yourself. So if you notice that you're having these feelings, if you notice that you're feeling a lot of anger, you're feeling a lot of bitterness, and you're feeling a lot of resentment, what do you do with those feelings? Well, you have to process and work through them and get to the underlying source of those feelings. It's very easy to say, oh, I'm angry because he abused me, or he assaulted me, or he offended me, or he hurt me. Sure, it's really easy to say that, but if it's been 3 years and you're still feeling angry and bitter and resentful around that issue, there's something more than just that issue. There's something underlying that. There's something deeper than that. A lot of times those feelings tend to dig a deeper hole from the starting point. So the starting point is up here. Whatever the offense was that happened is up here. But after years and years and years of not forgiving and continuing to hold on to these feelings, that's not the issue anymore. Like, there's another underlying issue that's going on there that you need to get to. So some of the ways that I would recommend processing through these feelings, the very first thing, and I know that you all see this coming, is go to therapy. Go see a therapist. It is a neutral, unbiased person that you can talk to and express all of these feelings to, in a space where you will be validated and not judged. They will help you to walk through these feelings, walk through the offenses, and get to the underlying reason for all of this pain and all of the sadness and the anger and the hurt and the guilt. A lot of times when you're trying to do that by yourself, it's just not as easy to do. You sometimes just need a neutral party to shed light on what's going on for you. And so I would highly, highly, highly recommend getting a therapist if you notice that you have a habit of not forgiving, or you haven't forgiven someone and you're holding on to all these unproductive, unhelpful feelings. Because if you're holding on to anger, bitterness, resentment, and guilt, you're not happy, you're not feeling good. It may be fleeting, it may come in different periods, but for the most part, if that is how you're feeling on a regular basis, you probably want to address that. Now, I know it's going to take more than me just saying that to get you all into therapy, so I'm also going to give you a few ways that you can start working on forgiveness on your own. One of the ways that you can do that is by journaling. It really can be cathartic and very therapeutic. You get to write down. I tell people all the time, I talk to my clients about just free writing. No judgment. Don't worry about grammar or how it's going to sound, whether or not you're going to sound angry. Just write all of the things that you're feeling, all of the things that you're thinking about. Get them out on that paper. You also want to make sure that it is something that cannot be read by anybody else, that you don't have to worry about somebody else finding it, because then you're still writing from a judgment perspective that somebody else might judge what you're writing. And so make sure that when you're doing this, you have the capacity to keep it private, keep it safe, and just keep it for yourself, because that allows you to be more vulnerable and more open about your feelings when you're not being judged by someone else. Now, with the journaling, something that I think is again a very cathartic experience is burning the journal entries or the whole entire notebook. So there was a point in my life where I was recovering from a relationship that just wasn't good for me. It was unhealthy, and it had become toxic for me. And so I had been out of the relationship. I had been journaling for, I want to say, a year. And I went back one night after I had forgiven him and I had moved on and I had just let go of all these different feelings. I went back and read the journal, watched my progress, watched my growth, was embarrassed by some of the things that I had written a little less than a year ago or a year before. And after that, I want to say I FaceTimed my best friend and we went outside and burned this journal. And just the amount of release that I experienced in that moment was really, it's really hard to explain what that was actually like, but it was like letting go of every single hurt, every single sadness, every single tear, every single outburst of anger, all of that. It was like letting it go in that moment and just burning into the ashes, kind of like the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? Like you burn it, you get all of the gunk and all the bad stuff off, and then something beautiful emerges from it. And so I really just, the imagery of burning things, the symbolism of burning things, it can be really powerful. And so you can either burn each page after you get done with it, which is why I wouldn't necessarily recommend typing it on a computer unless you can print it off. So you can burn that, or you can again burn the entire thing at the end of a certain time period, or when you feel like you've gotten to a place where you completely healed. Similar to journaling, you can also write a letter to the person that you are trying to forgive or the people that you are trying to forgive. You can write multiple letters to the person or the people you are trying to forgive. The important part about this and journaling is that you are telling your truth. You're being honest, completely naked, completely open and vulnerable in this space. If you're not being honest when you're doing these, you're not going to be able to get all the feelings out that you're desiring to get out. The other thing that you can do, again, these are things by yourself, you can talk to the person. You can say all of these things, maybe even after you journal, after you wrote the letter, you can read the letter out loud. But just saying these things out loud, saying your feelings out loud, expressing these emotions, yelling, screaming, hollering, doing all of that to get those emotions out as if you're talking to that person can also be really helpful. Now, on the other side of that, if you're thinking that you do want to confront the person, you would like to share these things with that person, like if you want to mail them the letter or you want to have a conversation with them, I don't not support that. However, I think it's important that you recognize what your expectations are at the end of that. A lot of people want to talk to the person and confront the person and have a conversation or tell them all of their feelings so that they can feel some kind of remorse, feel sorry, be apologetic, or repent in some kind of way. And not to say that that's not possible, not to say that that never happens, but I would encourage you not to go into the situation with that expectation, because unless that person has been doing their own work, unless they've acknowledged that they've done this, and a lot of people don't necessarily acknowledge that they've hurt you in some kind of way, they're not going to give you the remorse or the consolation that you think that you're going to get. So just be mindful of tempering your expectations around that. I don't have a problem with you confronting them or sharing it with them, but I think it's very disappointing for people when they don't get the response that they're looking for. So if you go into it not expecting anything and just really doing this as a cathartic experience for you, cool. But make sure that you know your motivations going into it so that you aren't disappointed and hurt when they don't give you the reaction that you're looking for. I just don't want you to wait until someone else apologizes or expresses their remorse or repents for what they did for you to let go of your anger and your bitterness and your resentment. Stop drinking that poison and waiting for them to die. It won't happen. Other ways that you can process these feelings are through meditation, yoga, prayer, or any other spiritual practices. Anything that allows you to be centered in the present moment and acknowledge the feelings that you're having will help you to release those feelings, because we are so often avoiding those feelings, trying not to acknowledge them, pushing them down, pushing them away. We don't allow ourselves to experience them. But the more that you can experience them, the easier it is for you to cope with them, release them, and let them go. Emotional energy can be pent up just like any kind of energy. And when those emotions are pent up for too long and they're not expressed in productive ways, they are going to come out in unproductive ways. They might manifest in illnesses, they might manifest in being sick or headaches or stomach aches. They can manifest in dysfunctional relationships with people. They can manifest in sadness, tears, just crying uncontrollably. Like, there's so many different ways that those feelings will come out. And so the best thing that you can do for yourself is to process them and work through them so that they're not coming out in ways that you're not prepared for. Our emotions are cues that tell us that something is going on, which is why if you notice, I haven't said that these emotions are bad or good or any of that, because they're really not necessarily that. They're telling you something. They're your warning signs. They're your red flags that something is going on. And our emotions are so important because they impact our relationships with people. They impact the way that we feel about ourselves. They impact the way that we function in the world. And so being better able to manage those emotions and process those emotions are just going to help you to be a healthier functioning person in society. And I won't get too much into the relational aspects of forgiveness or the lack thereof this week because, spoiler alert, we're doing being selfish relationally next week, and we're going to focus on that specific topic the entire episode, focusing on forgiveness of others and how that impacts our relationships, and forgiveness of ourselves and how that impacts our relationships. But just as a little disclaimer, anger, bitterness, resentment, and guilt can significantly impact our relationships, and particularly it can be very hurtful to the ones that are closest to us. So that's all for today. Be sure to join me next week as we close out our forgiveness series talking about relationships. Make sure you all go out and do something selfish today, even if it's just processing one of those feelings. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.